Today I'm speaking with Emily Maynard. Emily, thank you so much for joining me today.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, it's so good to meet you. And I'm going to give a quick bio here as we get started. Emily is in Southern California, originally from Oregon. She is a licensed marriage and family therapist, and she's certified in EMDR therapy. She's also worked in higher education. She went to Hillsdale College in Michigan, and she got her master's in clinical psychology from Pepperdine University. She's
Mhm.
also been on many podcasts. She's also a writer, including being published in Time Magazine and Women's Health. She's on Instagram as well at Emily Maynard LMFT. I'll have the link for that beneath this video, so please do subscribe there and follow the great work she's doing. But Emily, if you could tell us a little bit more about yourself and some fun things, and then we'll get started with your story.
Absolutely. Like you said, I live in Southern California, and I feel like that's a big part of my personality. I like the sunshine. I grew up in Portland, Oregon, and so moving about a decade ago from the rain to the constant sun was very good for me. I like just being outside, hanging around my neighborhood. And the latest hobbies that I've picked up, in addition to gluten-free baking, which is an entirely different chemical process and a challenge, has been getting really into Jeopardy. So my partner and I started watching Jeopardy about a year and a half ago, and we watch almost every game. And it's a nice little thing to do over dinner, just to sort of unwind and focus on something else. So I don't have any aspirations of ever appearing on it, but I do feel pretty good when I get a Final Jeopardy right.
That's awesome. Do you know most of the answers, or like what percentage would you say you know at this point?
See, on a good board, I know like three-quarters of the answers, and a hard board, probably more like a quarter to a half. But I feel like that's the one way I get to use my like weird little niche homeschool and evangelical and fundamentalist Christianity upbringing. It's like I always do really well in a Bible category or a Christian religion category.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. Well, we're so glad you're here. We love to hear people's stories. I do want to take some time at the end of our interview to talk more about what you do currently with your therapy and just all the ways that your gifts and your talents are sort of coming out and helping the community. But before we go to that, could you just take us back to your childhood and let us know what was it that you heard about the Bible and Christianity, and what was it like growing up with Jesus? I assume as your Lord and Savior and your best friend.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I kind of grew up at the crossroads of mainstream evangelical culture in the 80s, 90s, and 2000s, and much more fundamentalist ideology. So growing up, my parents were part of a Baptist church, which my grandparents had gone. But then as they had more children, I'm the second of six kids, and got more connected with people who kind of followed the ideology that they wanted for our family. That's when we got into homeschooling, and the whole like separate world of education and activities, and that groups like IBLP or ATI, much more fundamentalist type of thinking and theology. So I feel like I kind of speak both languages of like, I remember, being told I wasn't allowed to go to youth group anymore. Like that's sort of the switch of like we went to Awana, which was a Bible memorization and Christian activity group for kids at the Baptist church. But then we also did a lot of things with on the kind of schooling side with like political activism and some of the more right wing stuff that's happening coming to fruition now. But that's kind of how I was raised, kind of in both of those worlds a little bit.
Mm. It's interesting. I can relate to a whole bunch of that. What would you say you heard from the earliest days specifically about what the Bible was and about your need for a savior?
Yeah, my obviously I know now that children don't have free choice, right? Whatever they are told, they and whatever they experience becomes their norm and their whole reality. So what I remember being told is a little bit funny. I think I remember a lot more of the shame and the I'm bad inside coming a little bit later. One of my earliest memories, in fact, is of getting saved, which is the way you join the Christian religion. But that's actually strangely like not a traumatic memory for me. I remember praying a prayer, sitting on my mom's lap in, my bedroom, my childhood bedroom. And I have this like body sensation of warmth and love towards that child who was, doing this process that would make her close to her family and close to what she was told was right. So I don't have this idea that I was told as like an extremely young child, like you're bad inside, you're a sinner, Jesus needs to save you. That came later. I certainly have all of that trauma that comes with those messages towards young children. But my earliest memory is like, oh, I want to join something. And I feel love and dissipation in love. So I think that's something that I think is not everybody has, but it's something I get to keep, even, as my, religious participation has greatly shifted in my adulthood. Like I really feel connected to some sort of like loving experience. And that feels really good. But yeah,
Mm.
then a lot of the shame and badness came later.
So would you say you saw Christianity as the exclusive way, like the message of Jesus when his death and resurrection is the only way to have a life, to go to the good place, as they say, the good place after you died?
Absolutely. Yeah, that was sort of I mean, I wasn't exposed to any other religions or any people outside of the religion, right? So my entire extended family was all Christian. Even though I think I don't know what they all believed at the time or what they believe now, but that was like a cultural factor in our family, celebrating Jesus's birthday at Christmas, as cheesy as that sounds. Like everything we did, like this was my entire world. I didn't have any exposure to any other type of belief or belief system. So this was like the only right one because it was the only one I knew.
Yeah, exactly. I was just curious, as you grew in your faith and you had more experiences and just got more grounded in the doctrine and so forth, did you find yourself getting to a point where you really did feel like you were talking to God and sort of walking with Him, and that there was, we used to talk about devotions or your quiet time with the Lord. Like, what was it like behind closed doors when it wasn't like anything someone could have seen as a performance of like, oh, you're raising your hands in church and you're clearly trying to have some performance, like when no one's watching? What was it like
Mhm.
just you talking to God and feeling His presence?
Yeah, I was a big writer. So the idea of Christian like prayer journaling was also in vogue, I think, in the 90s when I was a child. And so that was again what I was taught to do, but it was something that I took really seriously and took on for myself, writing all the time in prayer format about my life and what I was thinking about. And, at a certain point, like feeling bad for having a crush or, feeling like crying out for some sort of like relief or concern to be heard. And most of that was through my own writing and then through like tons of reading. And like I said, like everything in my world was, going to church, going to Awana, which involved Bible memorization, being homeschooled. There was also a like religious education component of that, woven into all of my Christian evangelical homeschooling textbooks. Every story problem was about Jesus multiplying fish or if this number of people get saved or things like that, where Christianity was just like in every single part of my life. And so it was like being confined, like it was authentic because that was the only thing that existed to me.
Hmm. I definitely can relate to that. I grew up homeschooled as well, and it was all. I think we had mostly Becca books from
Hmm.
Pensacola, and then I went to Bob Jones myself. So I'm very
Oh,
familiar with
wow.
that
Yeah.
as well. So it's crazy. Now, with that sheltering that is so prevalent in those kind of groups, those kind of families, did you feel like you were being constricted? Or did you just feel normal, and did it feel kind of happy to you, even though if you were outside of it, you might have seen it differently. But when you're sometimes growing up in it, you just feel like this is the way. How did you feel about it?
Yeah, I would say I felt like an outsider in certain ways because I felt like my family wasn't living up to some of the like super high control religion ideals. Um, there's a lot of social pressure in those worlds that in order to prove you're doing the right thing, your family has to look a certain way, which often involves having a lot of money. And my family didn't growing up. And so, we didn't go to the big ATI conferences. We only attended locally. My family needed to like use food banks or other resources because, one income, homeschooling, six children, trying to be outside the system as much as possible, have a lot of financial constraints. So I remember feeling shame for like, well, what's wrong? Like, are we not good enough Christians that is it because are we struggling financially because my dad doesn't do morning devotionals with us consistently? Like, I think what happened is like I attached Christian beliefs and norms to our family experience. And that's where I think a lot of the like questioning started very early. Then when I think I was a teenager, I started questioning some other concepts like purity culture as much as I was performing belief in them and like wrestling with that privately in my writing. But I'm a good girl. Like I'm an Enneagram one, if that's like a fun little personality system that people use. And so being right and doing the right thing is like a really powerful motivator for me. And something that, I was told, like, here's the right way to live. Here's the right way to be. Here's the right way to think. Here's the right way to learn. Here's the right way to love. Here's like all of these, like, very high control, limited options. And so I was like, okay, well, it's already figured out for me. I just have to do all of these things.
Mm. With just for sake of people who are watching, you might know the acronyms we're talking about. So IBLP is Institute for Basic Life Principles, and
Hmm.
ATI is Advanced Training Institute.
Yes.
So these are basically like just these are just discipleship groups and trainings and conferences that basically keep people on the straight, narrow, conservative path. Block out
Hmm.
the world, separate yourself from the world, keep yourself very focused on things like purity culture, modesty, not letting things, bad ideas like evolution come into your
Right.
teaching. What other things would you say are some of the big motifs that you saw besides those real big ones that kind of made an impact on you as you went through those trainings and conferences?
I mean, I think one thing that really impacts me was the level of emotional control that was promoted to me as the right way to live, right? Like our emotions and our thoughts are not really things, they're things that our brain is just like constantly generating in our body systems. And so, but I was told like keep every thought captive, right? Certain emotions, to feel them or to think them, are sinful. So I remember being really confused about that. Like here I am having a strong emotion of like anger or frustration or impatience, but I was told like those things are sin, not those things are kind of the consequence of like being a mammal trying to relate to other mammals. And you can just sort of let them go or listen to them in certain contexts, or if you end up yelling at somebody, like here's how to repair. I wasn't taught any emotional skills at all or any relational skills. I was only told like be perfect, otherwise you're in trouble. And the weight of carrying this idea that like my thoughts could be bad or my emotions could be bad or my body could be bad, which are like three things you can't really control, was just terrifying to me, because I was like, the idea that you could be sinning and not knowing it was like psychologically terrorizing to me. The idea that you could, if you died with sin in your heart, then you could, your salvation was wishy washy. And then once my parents joined a like reformed Calvinist kind of theology church when I was 13, that was this whole other layer. Like, are you elect? How do you know you're elect? Like, the idea that the pool of good people are people who would be really saved or get to go to heaven just like kept shrinking as my life went on. And that was, I would say, really traumatizing.
Mm. It's interesting that some of the concepts you just brought up there I can really relate to the even the verses that like it almost felt like you were about to quote some verses, but the one about
Hmm.
taking every thought captive and Romans 12 about, constantly being renewed in your mind. And then just
Hmm.
the whole thoughts about like your sins, like, James with the emotions, like James talks about that the wrath of man does not bring about the righteousness of God. And there's some verse in the Psalms, I think, about Psalm 19, maybe about don't where the psalmist is saying like don't let me get caught up in presumptuous sins or something like that. But you have all these
Hmm.
ideas that, and of course the whole backdrop of Proverbs, saying don't trust yourself, don't lean on your own understanding.
Right.
You end up just feeling like between my foolishness and the pride of my heart and the clear sin and the devil trying to trick me, like I'm
Right.
just screwed in every direction. And I'm just like the message we got was that you're a beggar looking for the bread, and the bread is of course
Hmm.
Christ's righteousness covering you, but you don't get enough bread, kind of like the manna story. Like you don't get enough bread to
Right.
cover you for 6 months or a year or whatever. a lifetime. Like you have to go back every day saying, I am completely destitute and I'm begging
Hmm.
you for your righteousness because I am so bad and I am so, I lack the righteousness I need to be a good person. And it does. The word trauma definitely comes to mind when you think about what that does to, especially a small child saying, you are in
Hmm.
dire straits and you are really a bad, like, this is your fault, both because you're a child of Adam and Eve, but also because of your own
Right.
willfulness. And it's hard to
Hmm.
swallow like what that does. It's in some ways I struggle still to think about what did that psychologically do to us to be told that.
Yeah, because there's so many like even the smallest thing that you do, right, in that system is all sin is equal, all sin is bad. So if you don't confess, like, oh, I was disrespectful to my parent when they asked me to do something by not obeying immediately, that is the same as murder or, harming a child. And so to feel like the weight of, I don't really know what's sin or what's not, because those systems are always a little wishy-washy, but I feel like I'm told that there's all this stuff that could be sin or could be against God, and not really, like, I couldn't, maybe I'm not aware of it because I've been, blinded by my own pride, or maybe right, like one of the earliest verses that I was made to memorize was Jeremiah 17:9. Your heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. Or, another phrase that comes to mind is like, even your righteousness is like filthy rags. Like, that was taught to me as a, like, 7-year-old and under child. Like, I'm sure I was learning those verses by like 6. Um, and so just this idea that, like, I am bad inside, I'm good because I'm connected to Jesus, was always the, like, carrot, dangling. But I didn't really feel that all the time. I'd stopped feeling sort of love and acceptance and connection from, participating in this religion that my family told me was true. And I just started feeling like really shitty.
How
But I
early
was
in your
told like that was a problem too, right? I'm supposed to be happy. Count it all joy, right? Like, so
yeah
this just like splitting of your psyche is embedded in that experience.
how early did you have the words to identify that this was a disconnected worldview?
I think I'm an observant kind of person. So I think what I was trying to do was always trying to, like, even as a teenager, 12, 13, 14, I was trying to mend these things that were impossible. So I was either always, switching from this very binary thinking to being trying to, like, find readings or stories of people who were, like, weaving these things together, because all the adults that I saw appeared to be okay with this. Right? The more I learned about, like, okay, only a certain number of people, even people who profess to be Christians, are actually elect. Again, that was terrorizing to me as a 13-year-old, but I would look around and be like, well, what do you mean? Like, all these adults seem fine. They're, birthing babies and homeschooling their children, and, the dads are starting businesses together. Like, so it felt like the message I got was like, there was something wrong with me, that I don't accept this or think this is a wonderful and beautiful thing. It
Mm,
was like my problem for not, like, getting it.
yeah, I know what you mean. Now, just for the sake of again your storyline, I sort of throw in questions along the way just to make sure I kind of understand what happened. Do you
Mhm.
remember hearing the stories of how your family got caught up in the Reformed Calvinist perspective? Because it sounds like they didn't start there, but they went into it. What brought them into it, if you know?
Yeah, I mean, my parents, before they started having children, I mean, my parents were like semi hippies. So I think they liked this idea of, like, naturalness and, distance from some of the aspects of the world. Like, I think that was just appealing to them as people whose personalities are a little more, like, free and maybe a little more less, like, they're not super motivated by, like, achieving or materialist kind of things. So I think they were just drawn to people who also shared those beliefs, and they met another couple who introduced them to this idea of homeschooling, and that led into the world of, like, ATI and IBLP So those groups were already existing at that point, kind of promoting this idea of like, you can raise your family in this really countercultural way and have a lot of connection and spend time in nature and focusing on reading and literature and like, that's how to have a good connected family. And high control religion provides a lot of opportunities for people who maybe didn't have the best family experience themselves to like join this other thing, feel connected, and feel supported in the kind of challenging task of like raising more humans. So I think they were brought into it through their friendship, and then so we were homeschooled at that point. But when we got more into Reformed theology, it was actually joining a church of homeschoolers. So when I was about 12, a church, was split off from another church. As it always goes, there's a little propagation of a new high control church. And it was run by Greg Harris, who is a leader in the homeschooling movement in the United States, sort of countercultural fundamentalist movements. He's a father of Joshua Harris, who wrote a book called I Kissed Dating Goodbye that ruined a lot of people's lives in the 90s and 2000s. And obviously, Josh Harris was a young person when he wrote that book. He since recanted it and pulled it from publishing. But his father was where he got all of those ideas. So his dad started a church in Oregon, about 30 minutes away from where my family lived. And so my parents brought us to start attending that church, which I think was really comfortable for them, right? It was a bunch of other homeschool families, um, and provided this like full life and this other way to connect with people like them. It was like another smaller little group to sort of stay in a new little bubble that felt safe and meaningful to them. But that was where like Reformed theology, I think, was having a heyday through some of the influence of Doug Wilson's Christ Church. Obviously, some of these groups felt even more extreme than us at the time, even though I think they were influencing the church that we were participating in. So that was my first experience with like charismatic Christianity. It was a charismatic Reformed church, sort of in the vein of like Sovereign Grace Ministries
Right.
and Covenant Life Church. So there was a big connection with some of those churches on the East Coast and ours. Not
Mm.
officially, but unofficially, a lot of influence. And that's where the Reformed theology came in. I remember, like, I mean, churches, like Sundays were an entire day for us. So, it was like 30 minutes of worship and people speaking in tongues, and then usually an hour to an hour and a half sermon, then another 30 to 45 minutes of singing and communion and like all of these things that were pretty intense. So church was like a 2 to 3 hour activity. And then after church, there was a big potluck. And then people would stay kind of, through the afternoon and hang out with their children. So, at one point, I think there was about 1,000 people at that church. It was pretty big. And then, you know, it had its own fractures and splinters and no longer exists, which I think is lovely.
It is crazy to think about. It's amazing the picture you're painting. You're very good at painting pictures of kind of how it works and how it evolves. But it makes me think a lot about just the sense that so many of us got, and I'm sure you relate to this, and I would love your feedback on this. But I think a lot of us got this sense that whatever version of Christianity you're currently in, you need to have a little bit of a sense of your group probably isn't quite getting it right. And they might have like the core
Mm,
doctrine of like, you're a sinner deserving God's wrath, but God is a wonderful savior. And through his death and resurrection, you're covered. You might basically be barely getting into the kingdom because you've got that technically correct and you're coming by faith alone, not by works. But the idea is like God's kingdom isn't just future, it's now. He wants you to live in the kingdom, as it were, here on earth. And he wants you to have as much truth as possible and rightly dividing the word of truth. And you got this sense that over and over, different groups were saying, yeah, but we're the ones that have it right. Like I remember I grew up
yeah.
also more in a Baptistic group, and I also went more to Calvinism before, not my family, but I personally moved that direction. But you did get the sense that Reformed people are very arrogant. Of course, in Calvinism's just like the code word for we're arrogant pricks. But it's like you'd see it in like groups where, like, what am I thinking of? The groups that talk about, like, getting back to the Torah observant stuff, and
Hmm.
like Jesus didn't do, Jesus followed the Sabbath, so why are we doing Sunday? That's more like Constantine and
Right.
hundreds of years later. Like, let's get back to this, and let's Jesus was a Torah observant Jew, and so they're doing all this stuff, and they're doing the Seder's, and you get all these different groups. Of course, the my groups were very against charismatics. They were saying charismatics are bizarre, And I'm sure the
Hmm.
charismatics were saying it back, like, no, no, you don't get it. Like, we've got the spirit, and you guys are just dead in the water. And everybody's kind of attacking the culture or the theology, or maybe the practicality of like you're letting your girls go to the beach and wear bikinis. Like, what? Where's your modesty? Where's your purity culture? Everybody's attacking everybody, but I think it builds you up to constantly say, I need to feel like I'm on unsteady ground here. I need to go for the next,
Yeah.
not the next big thing, but just like the next level of my intensity. Like, if I'm really serious about God,
Mhm.
I need to have my spidey senses up for what are we doing here that's not listening to the spirit for real, not listening to the word of God. And it's funny though that I think that dynamic and many others backfires on them because you end up constantly saying to yourself, at least I did, and I think a lot of people in my groups did, you say to yourself, I need to figure out what I'm doing wrong and where I'm not putting the
Yes.
pieces together. And they're literally telling you, study the word, be a Berean, and you need to understand the word of God, rightly divide it, and don't and be have discernment. And the problem is they never say, but by the way, have discernment about whether or not this worldview is actually true or not. But like when
Yeah.
you're setting yourself up to constantly say, don't check your brains at the door, you need to be apologetics minded, you have good
Hmm.
reasons and rationales. Well, then when you go to actually do that and you realize this thing is falling apart, it's all bullshit, you're like, well, wait a second. Don't you want me to actually be discerning here? Because I am. And
Hmm.
it's like you can be
No,
discerning
they don't.
within their little circle of topics.
Yeah. Right. They're trying to keep you panicked, right? And to sort of pass on this hypervigilance to like what am I doing wrong at all times? And so I did become this like active learner. I was reading, Wayne Grudem's systematic theology. I remember like reading the tome of like the Council of Biblical Manhood and Womanhood. Um, I was reading John Piper and Tim Keller and of course only men. But only white men specifically. But I was trying to figure out what information could I get that would make me feel okay because I knew I believed this. Like I believed it deeply. There was no part of me that thought this wasn't true, but I didn't feel great about it. And so I was trying to fix that feeling by getting more information. Because apologetics training, like I went to, traveled across the country to go to like apologetics camps with other conservative Christian teens and then ended up like teaching them and trying to like bring other kids in through some of the organizations that I worked with. And I was looking for a thing, information that would finally make me feel okay. Because apologetics says if you get the right information, then you just feel great about all of this.
It is amazing. And eventually you do get to a point, I think, where you realize that I like to use this phrase that you were the sucker in the room. I was the sucker in the room.
Mhm.
And yet they're so insulated. And it breaks your heart because you realize once you do finally get out and you do finally see the man behind the curtain, that really is all it is. It is just a cultural
Yeah.
thing. It is a lot of, I mean, there's a lot of motifs hidden behind it. It is white supremacy often. It's a lot
Mhm.
of control,
Patriarchy.
patriarchy, but it's also just it's like it's mythology. It's just people
Yeah.
playing games, and you really do feel bad because you realize like if it took me like it took me 43 years to escape, it took me 43 years, and I was like just naturally minded to always ask the right questions. If you have someone else that just wants a very simple, I just want a simple faith in Jesus. I don't need all the answers. They're not as inclined to ask the hard questions. They're going to go to their deathbed thinking this is all real and glorious and wonderful, and I'm about to see my Lord and Savior when I die. And it breaks my heart because I think, wow, like you probably are not going to wake up, and it's a weird thing when you wake up from Christianity and fully escape it. Sort of like the Matrix theme. Like some of
Mhm.
these people, they don't know they're in the Matrix, and they don't. If they knew, they would not want to wake up. They'd say, "Please keep me plugged in. It's just too much to think
Yeah.
about it."
Absolutely. And I what I've come to believe now is like that's not my business. Like I'm not in charge of making like I was raised my whole life like it is your job to go out and make disciples through evangelicalism or through, promoting reformed theology or apologetics. And like this idea that I was made to change other people and make them like me is something I feel so free to give up on. Like I just every once in a while I care, and then I'm like, you know what? I just came back to the idea like I don't. It's not my business. Like I don't need to change other people's beliefs anymore from whatever they are. Like I just need to make sure that I'm living with integrity towards my values that I've chosen as an adult, you know, and that I get to just like live as best I can in the time and place and luck that I was, born into. And it's freeing, I think, for me to just say, like, I don't really need to take people's belief from them anymore. I have freedom to just keep going on my own path. And I don't know, it doesn't really make a difference to me anymore, other than when those people, with radical beliefs are in charge of the government and setting policy. But like my neighbor down the street, I don't really care what they believe.
Mm. But I do want to get back to your story in a minute. But since you brought this up, can I ask a little bit more about it? Do you
Yeah.
feel like a compulsion to and ever to see this more less as an issue of like just live and let live. You believe your stuff, I'll believe mine. But just to see this as a mental prison and as a virus that has made our culture, our species sick, and also just that obligation to say that there are children who are being psychologically abused, and I can't turn a blind eye to the fact that this is a virus that needs to replicate. It by definition says
Hmm.
I must pass this on. I must get you in my club, or else there's bad things for me and you. Like when you look at the children in this and you think there's children yet to be born who are going to be told in the next few years you are a sinner and you are bad and God does is looking in your head and judging you and you are basically headed to hell if you don't believe. Do you feel an obligation to make a difference for the sake of saying I have to be a culture changer? Yes, like I want to respect someone's autonomy, but also there's the reality that if I don't, if we those of us that are free don't speak up, we're basically saying I know a bunch of you are in the cave looking at the shadows and calling them real, but there is sunlight to come out to, and also the sense that you all were deprived of a lot of information. Like for example, I went to school to be a pastor, so I arguably had all
Mm-hmm.
kinds of exposure to biblical stuff. But even with that extreme exposure to the Bible for decades, voluntarily as well as through school, I would say when I finally started deconstructing, I knew almost nothing about where the Bible came from and where Christianity
Right.
came from. Like
Right.
that's really not appropriate and like right to tell people you need to give your whole life to this, but not tell them where it came from or to sort of lie or sweep it under the rug. It's like if you want to me, it's like if someone wants to be a Christian, they should do that if they really feel compelled to. But also those of us who are saying that when we were Christians, we were deprived of critical information. It's kind of like if someone says,
Hmm.
I want to marry so and so," but it's like I want to marry someone that's like an arranged marriage, and I don't really
Hmm.
get to meet them and get to know them. It's like, well, if you're about to marry someone that's been arranged for you, that might be kind of cool in some ways, but also you kind of need to know have at least some questions answered. And that's kind of what I feel like we did with Christianity. We kind of like got arranged into this marriage and we never had a
Hmm.
chance to ask the hard questions. I mean, does that resonate at all?
It does. I think it's just like, what can I actually do with the fact that that exists, right? Like people are telling children things that I think are terrorizing and terrible all the time, right? They're also indoctrinating them into patriarchy and capitalism and white supremacy and these like systems that exist that I don't believe in. And yet I know that they affect my life and I have to engage with them somewhat. So I think a lot about like, what can I actually do? I cannot stop all children from getting that message. Would I prefer that people who would like to join a religion like have to be 18 to do that? Yes, but also like that's not how religions have always worked, right? Like religions all over the world are often passed down through families and communities. So I am thinking about like what can I actually do? I can stand on the sidelines and say, "Hey, if you're ready to leave, I can help." Or if you're ready to leave, it's okay. You can come spend some time with us and we'll care for you as like a recently traumatized person. Like I want to be standing near the edge, waving my hand, saying, like, if you are dying to step outside of that circle, like try it and see how you feel. And then, with my specific skills as a trauma therapist who focuses on religious trauma, I am trained to be able to help in a one specific way, how to help people like deconstruct the psychological impact of what they were told about God or the Bible or religion and like rebuild their lives in the way that works for them now, which sometimes looks like choosing to participate in a religion again. And so I have to come back to my core value, which is that adults have autonomy and that I can't protect every child from being harmed the way that I wish I could because I'm literally just like one, little girly. Like I I know it's not psychologically good for me to try to save every child. But I can say, "Hey, I will stand up here and say it is always wrong to hit children. I do not care. You can never convince me that a child deserves to be hit. You can call it whatever you want. You can call it spanking. I'm going to call it abuse because that's what the scientific research says. Nobody deserves to be hit. Nobody is better for being hit. And so I will stand here and say that that's wrong. I will advocate for more policy and legislation that we could have a law that would say hitting kids is always wrong. But I can't stop every child from being hit. And so how do I live in that like tension of knowing trauma is continuing to happen all around me, but my pool of what I can do to affect that is pretty limited. And both of those things are true. And that's something I don't know, I try to navigate. As a trauma therapist, I think some of my training has been like, how do you sit with something that is violent and evil, call it out, and offer, support and healing to that person who experienced that, and also not get stuck in this idea that like I can save everyone, because that takes me back to that old place of fundamentalism and overthinking my own importance. And that's not very good for me. It's not good for my well being or my relationships to think I'm more important than I am.
Yeah, it's a good word. I feel like I do want to try myself to be a culture changer, but yeah, at the same
Yeah,
time, you got to preserve autonomy, and it's a hard
right. And
balance.
how do
And
we do that? I think is the question that we
yeah,
get to explore.
and nobody would want anybody to be saying, how you have to raise your own kids. No one wants you. Nobody wants
Right.
the community to have to come in and say this is how you must raise your kids or you should not raise your kids. Yeah, we all deserve autonomy to raise our kids in the way we feel best, but it breaks my heart that so many kids do
Yeah.
grow up in this, and I wish there was some
Me
way to
too.
be more
Yeah.
involved while still keeping autonomy. But
I think what
I,
you're doing matters though, because you're being visible for the people that are ready to find you. And some of those people are teenagers living in, high control religious families where they can't escape yet. But I think the internet sent a lot of fractures into, we could talk about algorithms and what people are trained into, but I think the internet is how my deconstruction started to shift. And so I was able to find and just be exposed to new information that really helped. So I think, visibility and public conversations about this stuff is really important.
hmm. I'm glad you said that because I do want to go to your deconstruction. Can I just ask one last question before we get into
Yeah.
the more of the meat of that? What with all the stuff with the Bogothard and all that, all those groups? Could you just clarify what were the roles and the standards that you were given in terms of gender roles as well as purity,
Mhm.
culture, and modesty roles? I just wanted to kind of explore that a little bit, and then we'll jump into the actual deconstruction part of your story.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly was told about the idea of sexual abstinence before I was even told what sex was, or one of the markers I think of a high control group is you're not given any sort of accurate information about your own body or about different identities or gender presentations that exist. So like I grew up only binaries. There are only men and they behave this way. They are strong, they are protectors, they are leaders, and women are this other like very specific thing, and they are mothers and submissive and supporters and teachers. And even when my family didn't necessarily, like when my own parents didn't fit those gender roles super well at times, like that's what made me a little bit scared, because I was like, wait, sometimes like my mom makes decisions and she actually seems better at managing finances than my dad. And like my dad is not really an authoritarian, aggressive kind of person in his personality. Like I can see that that's not good for him when he tries to do it. So I became aware very early that like some of these roles or uniforms that people were told to put on like are a little bit unhealthy. But I was told again, this is the right way for a family to be. This is the right way for a person to be. So I remember a lot of conflict in my teenage years, especially because I was told that the right way to be a woman was to be a mother. And I didn't really have any interest in motherhood. I just felt like that's not something I am longing for. I certainly know women who do, but like that thing has never happened for me at all. So I again felt like I was broken. There was something wrong with me that I had to hide. I couldn't be like, I don't really feel like having kids. Like, I'd love to have a career someday. Because no one in my community would have accepted that. They would have been like, what? Like, what do you mean? Um,
Did you
and
have
then
anyone you could talk
certainly,
to, like anyone that was safe enough to share that
no,
with?
absolutely not. No, absolutely not. Like I was never, the most I was exposed to were like other women who had taken on the role of wife and mother and homeschool teacher, but they actually had a degree. So my mom actually has a degree in elementary ed. Like she was a really good teacher. I think I got a pretty decent, elementary education because of her access to education. And so I was drawn to the other moms in the community. I would show up to like help with the babies or help them teach their kids or something, certain subjects. But I was always drawn to the women who like had a life and a career before they took on this role of submissive, birthing person. So I think that made me at least feel like, okay, if I go to college and if I have a job, that's going to be okay because at some point, I'll like the wife and mother thing will just happen to me and I'll just deal with it then. Like, and growing up in a high control community like that, I mean, people were getting engaged and courting and their families were like arranging their marriages at 18, 19, maybe 20, but that was already kind of late. So when I left for my first semester of college, my older sister had gone to college. I went to this very conservative, now well-known conservative Christian. It wasn't Christian at the time, but it was a very conservative politically college called Hillsdale College in Michigan. And so I was allowed to go to that college, but that was there was no like, hey, let's explore which college you might want to go to and what you want to study. It was like, well, you can go to Hillsdale College, and Hillsdale College gave me money to attend there. And so I was like, okay, I guess this is where I'm going to college. And but when I came back for my first semester of college, the girls that were in my cohort, the people that I knew, I think like three of them were married with one baby. Two of them were married, with a baby expected, as soon as it worked out. Like a couple other people were stay-at-home daughters, which is where they would just like not go to school, or maybe they would take like an accounting class at the community college, but they were primarily working for their father's business and practicing homemaking skills with their mother or raising their younger siblings. So I felt like I was an anomaly in that community just for being a woman who was like trying to step out even a tiny bit out of this identity of like, you will be a wife and you will be a mother. And like, that is your highest calling in life someday. Yeah, I guess it didn't really quite get into purity culture, but it's all packaged up, right? If there's only one right way to be a person of a specific gender, like there's not a lot of room for exploration or understanding of like the complexities of being a person.
As you did eventually become aware of sexuality, did you feel like there was any shame there, or did you feel like that was
Yeah, there was only shame.
like what would you say was your first time that you just felt like, wow, like I am a sinner? Was it just like ideating, oh, but wow, I really think that guy's hot or something? Like, how does that play out?
Hmm.
Like, what does it look like?
Yeah,
Because I know what it looks like for a guy to have if you have a lot of shame, but what does the shame look
right.
like on your side?
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't told that like women experience sexual attraction. I was only told women experience emotional attraction. So I remember confessing crushes that I had on guys in church, like, oh, that guy's cute. But I was never given the like pathway really to think like, again, with a lack of sexual information, I was exposed to like kissing maybe on movies, but that was just sort of fast forwarded anyway, or was like blocked. So I don't think that I like had this, obscene kind of scenarios even pop up in my mind as a young person to feel bad about, but I felt bad about the emotions. Oh, I like this person. Oh, I think they're so cute. But it felt and that just felt incredibly simple. Like the idea that I could even have an emotional attachment, right? Because I was told not only do you have to keep your body pure in this way of not engaging with any sort of, your own sexuality or anyone else's in a sexual context, but you have to keep yourself emotionally pure. If you have a crush that is taking something away from your future spouse, that is giving your heart away. And that was almost more powerful to me than this idea that you could like lose your body sexually or lose, sexual autonomy. Like I knew that was not a possibility. Like nobody around me was having sex as a teenager, but this idea that like a crush could be bad or sinful was like really powerful for me. I was raised in a community that believed not only was there no, sexual interaction before marriage, but often no kissing. So I remember being in a group of girls, around 14 or 15, and they were all one by one, like This is after church in the sanctuary, just hanging out. They were all saying, like, yeah, I'm not going to kiss till my wedding day. Oh, I'm not going to kiss till my wedding day. I really want my wedding program to say the first kiss. And it got to me, and I just remember being like, oh, yeah, absolutely. But I remember being like, I don't know if I want to go that far. Like saving your kiss for marriage was felt a little much to me at the time, and I was hoping I wouldn't be held to that standard. Um, yeah. So I felt a lot of shame about the emotional side. And then, certainly, as my sexuality developed, there was so much shame about this idea that, like, certain places in my body felt good. But I was told that even was sinful. Like, pleasure was sinful, whether it was with someone else or even just with yourself. So there was a lot of like shame and repentance and why do I keep doing this? And then, in young adulthood, like, well, is this what people are talking about, like sexual addiction? Is that what this is? So there was nothing like normal about having a body or having autonomy or being able to feel pleasure in your body in so many different ways. That was all wrong. And I felt really guilty about it for a long time.
It's interesting that some of the stuff you're saying, if I could just like zoom out a little bit from that to just like a
Hmm.
slightly broader context, there's almost this picture that gets painted for us that includes purity culture, but a lot of other stuff that's almost not even Christian, like the idea of almost being off grid and getting into
Hmm.
essential oils and having, 10 kids if God so blesses, and, not eating, things with food dye in them, whatever. Like you get this whole list of things that like good Christian people do, and it includes different things for different groups. For some groups, it's like no alcohol. For some groups, it's like
Right.
beer's a big deal in some groups, and
Yep.
smoking cigars is a big deal to some people that I've come across in the Reformed community. But like you get your group, and they have these rules, and like if you follow these rules, and of course it's heavy on purity culture, then you kind of get back to like the best life. And then
Hmm.
in these kind of topics and other similar ones, I was given a lot this idea of like God has a plan A for you. Like if
Right.
you're willing to bow the knee and really listen to him, he wants to literally like bless your socks off. He just wants to give you so much goodness. But if you do end up deciding to kind of do it halfway his way and halfway your way, he's still going to be free to bless you, but you're kind of messing it up. It's like you're throwing away his blessings. And it included a whole bunch of different things at different times. Honestly, the goalposts kind of shifted it, but there was definitely this sense, like you said, with the purity culture, that if you know that someone else besides the person you might currently be dating or interested in, someone else down the line is your future, like the plan A is to take everything, keep everything for that final person. And
Right.
it's weird, but I've been deconverted now for 5 years, and I'm now for the first time in my life in a spot where I'm no longer a Christian, and for the first time in my life, I'm free to be sexually active outside of marriage covenant construct. And it's really weird, but there's a part of me that's still, after all that I've deconstructed from, like I write I write letters and poems to my future wife, to the future love of my
Hmm.
life, and I feel like I'm like if I know that she's out there and I'm literally doing this, it's just part of the healing process for me to write letters to her, be like, I miss you, I can't wait to see you, and I think about you every day, but I don't know who you are. But like that's kind of in some ways healing for me. But I also sometimes think that's
Hmm.
probably part of like that whole construct. Like maybe the best thing to do to heal would just be to go enjoy some casual sex. But it's like it's hard for me because of what I've been through, and it's weird. This stuff really messes with your brain in the sense that you want you're still in that plan A, plan B mindset. Does that
Right.
resonate at all?
Yeah, absolutely. And as somebody trained in trauma therapy, like that is the point of trauma. You are intellectually safe, right? You know what you believe now about, autonomy and consent and people's right to join up in ways that feel good, whatever that looks like for them, as long as they're, both adults and able to make those decisions. And yet your body is stuck in this idea that you are not, that you have to conform to some ideal or that it's more romantic to do these things. So that's some of the stuff I do in my work is like just walking people through like, well, other options exist. Like you can choose to keep whatever parts of your upbringing you want to, but is that something that's good for you? Um, and is that working? Like, does that help right now? Or does that feel like an old thing that you can't get rid of, but you don't know why?
Yeah.
And again, letting people have autonomy to decide, like, yeah, I think this is romantic and special, and I would love to find somebody who would be honored to receive these letters someday. Or do you feel like this might be keeping me stuck and I don't know why I'm doing it?
Yeah.
And if you
Exactly.
can have both ideas, in your mind, like,
Yeah.
I don't know, because I don't know if, like, again, I don't think the opposite of purity culture is casual sex. I think it often involves casual sex, but I think the opposite of purity culture is autonomy and
Mm.
choice. And not everybody would feel good doing that, even outside of their upbringing. Some people, right, they have different sexualities that require different levels of relationship, or even, asexual people exist and are often hidden by purity culture, and need to figure out, like, how do you express and explore your sexuality, whatever that looks like, in a way that is true to you right now, and how do you, like, share that with other people if that's part of what you want. So I don't know, is that interesting? Is that
Yeah, no,
helpful?
that's a good answer. It is true. I think you're onto it. That a lot of this stuff, it is like what it looks like on the surface of, well, maybe this is bad, maybe it's not, maybe you need to reject it, maybe you don't. A lot of it's like there's no, this isn't black and white. It is a gray area,
Mhm.
and it is going to shift over time as we have different ideas and different
Right.
relationships and experiences. And I think in some ways, it just reminds me that no matter where I land or someone else with a different idea about this land, yeah, the reality is that this thing traumatized us a lot. Like it messed with
Yes.
your
Right.
ability to feel grounded and to feel safe and to
Mhm.
feel like, I mean, we should not at this point, for me, it's like I've been removed from Christianity for 5 years. I mean, fully
Mhm.
removed. Like I shouldn't be dealing with any kind of shame at this point. And yet, and I would say by and large, I don't, but there's still
Right.
times. And it
Mhm.
reminds me that the roots go very deep, both in terms of the
Yes.
shame issue, but just more the psychological indoctrination. Like there's a reason that Christianity works so well. It's because they get you while you're
Right.
young. And when
Yep.
you're older, you can't see what they did to you.
Right.
So
Yeah.
I
It has shaped your body and brain in ways that you never understand. And that, I think, some of, like, what healing religious trauma looks like is, like, how do you learn to live okay in spite of what happened to you? We're not forgetting what happened to you. We're saying, like, it did impact you, but you still deserve to live as best you can now. How do we make that possible?
mm, exactly. Well, going back to your story a little bit, could I ask when you got to the point where you were really just saying to yourself, something's wrong here. There's alarm bells going off. There's things in this worldview that not just don't feel right, like maybe something about the patriarchy that occurred, or something in a church that it just doesn't rub you the right way. But where you went beyond that, where you said it isn't like I'm in the wrong church, or maybe I need to study more Bible stuff or get more theology in my head, but where you were actually stepping back and saying there are much bigger issues here. What was it like when you first admitted to yourself that you were on a journey that was perhaps taking you way past where you had grown up in and what you were taught? And was like, what were some of the biggest fears in terms of like whether it's loss of salvation or that the devil was involved or just that your pride was in the way? Like, what were the fears that got you had to go through and go over those hurdles to be able to be free to truly just say, I'm going to search for the truth no matter where it takes me.
Hmm. That's such a good question. I think that my deconstruction was slow enough that I was already building something valuable to myself. So by the time that last little piece snapped of, like, oh, wait, like, I don't think we go anywhere after we die. Like, I think our bodies are just biological. Um, I had already built up this, like, wonderful pile of things that I wanted to keep, like my own values of, like, love and justice and kindness and, feminism and, like, affirming all sexualities and identities. Like, there wasn't something that dropped out where I just, like, felt like, oh, I have nothing anymore, because I already had so much. I think my deconstruction process was, like, definitely a shift from fundamentalist Christianity to more, like, progressive but still evangelical Christianity, to very, like, I would say, like, fluid, progressive, sort of like, you don't have to believe, but you can join our practices type of Christianity, like a ritualistic, in a positive way, like, you can come and sit in silence with us, like, those kind of rituals that I think exist across religions or across even, non-religious spaces of, like, human meaning or value, like silence, lighting a candle, like smelling a beautiful smell, like incense type of things. So I didn't feel like I was losing a belief at that point, really. I was just like, oh, of course, nothing happens when we die. Like, okay, this is just like a thing that people believe that makes death easier, which, humans have always tried to figure out, like, how do we deal with the fact that we all die? So I felt like a very comforting existential, like, I felt like the bottom didn't drop out from under me. I just moved to this other place of like, oh, well, now I'm just part of humans dealing with death. And that's not a scary place. That's a place with where we all are, whether we're conscious of it or not. Certainly, people try to deal with death in pretty destructive ways that hurt others. But it's something that will happen to all of us. And there are people who find peace in that and who find like a sacredness in that. Like the fact that it all ends and nothing matters means we get to choose what matters to us. And that I think is really beautiful. So I think the thing that really was scary for me was like, do I have to lose my family? Because my family is so incredibly religious. I was with a partner at the time who was religious and was raised religious in Christianity. So I think that was the question for me. Is like, oh my God, am I going to lose more relationships? Because I lost relationships when I like decided I wasn't that into purity culture anymore. And, told my friends that I grew up with that I like stayed over at somebody's house. And they were like, are you even a Christian anymore? And I was like, yes, like what are you what and they stopped being friends with me. So like that I think was my biggest fear, is like, am I going to lose relationships with people I love that I don't necessarily want to lose, if I step into my own world even more, or my own beliefs even more, or talk about them and like exist as a person who holds public beliefs.
It's interesting that that fear of losing relationships. I I feel like I got spared some of the worst of it compared to some of the stories I hear. But man, some of the groups they skin you alive. I mean, especially
Yeah.
the JWs, like you literally just can't talk
Mhm.
to anybody. That just
Yeah,
there's
you don't exist. The shunning that happens is
yeah.
incredibly traumatic.
Yeah, I grew up hearing a little bit about that from the Amish community. I grew up near Philadelphia,
Mhm.
right near the
Mhm.
airport. But I went to school in Lancaster County, Lancaster Bible College, which is Lancaster County, Pennsylvania's Amish country. So you'd hear about like Amish shunning, where they literally just like turn their backs, and there's probably a couple shows I saw as a kid where they literally like just turn their backs on you, and you pretty much become homeless in some way. But
Mhm.
I always had that fear, but I kind of I think had I was sort of spared it myself in the sense that I was so eager for the truth that I was like, you get so eager for the reality, like, well, if this isn't real and this is mythology and that's bullshit, like,
Right.
well, what's left? Like, what is real? And you're like, I will give
Mhm.
up anything to have the truth. And it's sort of that phrase, the unexamined life is not worth living. Like, I
Yeah.
want to know. I got to know the truth, no matter what I give or lose. And the reality too of like, if people are willing to walk away from me because I want the truth, then what does that say about my friendship or relationship? Maybe they're not really my friend. But can I ask, did
Mhm.
you in that process though, the question that it comes to my mind so much when people get to that point in their story where you say that you were able to articulate like maybe there isn't an afterlife, and maybe this Christian worldview is not a correct worldview. When you're doing that, the hardest parts for me and for a lot of people are that it wasn't just an intellectual faith, that
Right.
it was you were literally in a
Mhm.
relationship with this was your best
Yes.
friend. He was your
Right. I
king,
had an entity that was involved in every aspect of my life.
and you talked to him, and you
Mhm.
felt like you were probably he was talking back to you, or at least guiding you. How did
Yeah.
you get over the reality of like, you know, this doesn't make sense, this doesn't make sense, but
Right.
like he's like I remember one person was giving the example like if you were married and your spouse was in the next room and someone tries to convince you like they're not real, like I literally just ate breakfast with them and I can literally go get them. They're right here.
Mhm.
Can't tell me they're not real. They're in my life. That's kind of I mean, it's a stretch, but it's kind of like what it feels like with God. And you're like, even when you get to the point, you're like, I don't think God exists. Like, but I know
Right.
He lives. He lives within my heart and my mind, and we
Yeah.
communicate. He is truly is the lover of my soul. Like, how did you deal with that part of it?
I think I just like I I didn't deny my own experience. I was just like, "Oh, that was me talking to me. That was me guiding me." Like that was like the complexity of myself engaging with me, offering me love, like offering me, relief or kindness. Like I don't think it has to be this other entity for it to be important. Like, I think of like people that I love that have died, they are still with me because they are in my mind. And I think of them and I think, like, oh, what would this person say if I told them the story and I feel love or connection or something? And so I'm like, the power of the human imagination is amazing. Like we invent gods. Like what a marvelous thing. Like what a delightful thing. What an absurd thing. What a funny thing. So I think it didn't feel like I was losing myself. It felt like I was like gaining a piece of myself. It felt like I was gaining agency. Where it was like someone told me that this voice in my head that said you're gonna be okay, or hey, you should really do this, was like this other thing that I couldn't always tell what sort of attitude it had toward me. Like the God I was raised with seemed very hot and cold, very abusive, very like loving but controlling but authoritarian, right? Like but kind, like and I was like, oh, at the end of the day, like that was just me talking to me or my community talking to me, trying to give me the ideas that they had about the right way to live or the right way to be. And that's not scary to me. So I know it is for some people, but I was just like, yeah, I man, humans, like what a weird thing these brains are. We still don't really understand them. You
Yeah.
know, we have like a couple like scanning machines, but I think in the next, hopefully like hundreds of years we'll get some more science funding and we'll discover more things about the human brain that make it marvelous and terrifying. And that's where I am just like, wow, what a weird biological thing that has evolved to this state. Like, and what a marvelous thing. I get to think that it's funny that I talked to a god for so long. I get to like feel however I want about the person writing in those journals and the stories that she held. Like now I look at them and I'm like, girl, that's a lot of it. Undiagnosed anxiety and complex PTSD. But I
It
have
is.
compassion for myself. Like I think that's where I end up with. It's like, oh, I'm not some fool that believes like whatever she was told. Like I'm a person shaped by my community and their beliefs. And okay, like who cares? Like everybody is.
It sounds like you probably then at that point we're dealing with obviously the trauma of like what you were taught, but not the trauma of like, oh my God is not real. Like that whole shock of
Yeah,
like my father figure is gone, heaven isn't
right.
real. Like it sounds like that wasn't as intense for you, which is good. I mean,
It wasn't. And I think part of that is because I had a slower process and I was more attuned to like this idea of a loving entity at that point. Like I didn't lose an authoritarian view of God. Like I lost a loving view of God. And so that felt easier to incorporate into like, oh, well, that's just me and my values and like how I want to live because of, you know, those are my values right now. And that's how I want to interact with them. So
mm,
I think a slow process is sometimes helpful in certain ways.
yeah, you kind of do your grieving along the way, I guess, in some ways.
Yeah, but you also can't control your process, right? Like if you just wake up one day or you look at the right YouTube video and you're like, "Oh my God, that's not real." Like there is space too for you to be okay someday, whatever that looks like. You're going to move through different feelings about it, but it's probably kind of normal and like there's a whole community of people that have felt them and will touch you on the other side and be like, "You're going to be okay. We're going to figure this out together."
Yeah, it is amazing that what you just said about you just wake up one day and you feel different. Something clicks. It's amazing when you have that experience, but someone else hasn't.
Mhm.
It's so crazy because you kind of want to explain it, but at the same time, like we sort of alluded to before, for people that just aren't ready, they're just not going to
Yeah.
get it, and it's weird. You feel like, and I know that's a big dividing line. It breaks up families, it breaks up marriages. It certainly is a understandable piece where someone is like, my life is all about Jesus Christ and the Bible and the kingdom, and if you're telling me that
Mhm.
that's not what your life is about anymore, and you're actually telling me you don't think it's even real, then we have truly a watershed moment here, and you wish you could explain it, but knowing that you can't, or even
Right.
if you did try to explain it, even eloquently, it would they would just be fall on deaf ears, as the Bible
Right.
says, he who has ears to hear, let him hear. But you end up
Right.
getting to a point where you feel like I I remember realizing when I deconverted, you have chosen a path that is inherently and consistently going to be a lonely path. Like this is going to
Mm.
make you feel more like you used to feel like you were part of the earth, which is and part of the time of the universe, but that this was part of God's eternity, and your life was
Right.
part of human history, which is part of God's writing the story. And all of a sudden, you're like, I'm not part of an eternal kingdom. I'm not part of a story. I'm just a mammal living my short life, and
Mhm.
then I'm gone. And you realize like you're an orphan, as it were, in time and space.
Mhm.
You're much more lonely. It just hits you hard. Like I'm really alone here. And even the people that are your partners, in life, they may come and go because of these differences in worldview. and you realize practically I'm alone, probably more than ever, and
Mhm.
it's hard. And I've realized it too on the other side, where I think to myself, like, what if somebody, like, what if two atheists get married, and then and they're both kind of materialistic, and they're both, nihilistic, and they're both very much in agreement, and one of them decides to really get into spiritualism and woo woo, and they start doing, the drugs and stuff, and having experiences, and
Yeah.
they feel like they're reading about near death experiences every day, and all of a sudden their life is much more spiritual, and somebody becomes like a witch, and it would, whatever it is, and it's like, that's even that, where you're anti-religion in one sense, even that you could still diverge, and it made me feel very sad. I feel like I did a lot of grieving, realizing you're
Mhm.
this is a wake up, but it's a wake up to loneliness. Did you feel that at all, or did you feel like you were in a better spot than that?
Yeah, I think when I felt loneliness, one, it helps that I'm an introvert and an internal processor, so I'm not used to discussing my like deepest thoughts with other people except for the entire internet. Um, but I think the other communities of, first it was like post evangelical or deconstruction type of people. And then it was, other like non religious people. Um, I think like I've always connected to community and known that like where we're all alone together. Or
Mm,
um the other thing I thought of is like I think that's a really important question that you get to hold outside of religion is like how do you love or hold people who change? Whether that's people who decide to join a religion, they have a religious experience. I'm not going to show up and be like, well, you didn't have that experience, right? The same way that I'm like rejected proselytizing, I'm going to be like, oh, wow, that's so interesting. And recognize like my feet are planted where I am. That's okay. And what's in the other space between me and someone else is like love or connection or friendship or kindness or these other things that I think are also beautiful and human, just as much as imagining God seems to be human. And like, how can I lead with that? I don't think you can ever decide how a relationship will end when it starts. And that is what's terrifying about human relationships. But that's the thing that keeps me really connected moment by moment to like, well, is this working? Is this working for everybody involved? And the end of friendships or the end of romantic partnerships is incredibly painful, but it's not as existential as it used to be. Like I was told the most important thing you could find in a romantic partnership is like one that they hold the same values of purity with you, that they've never done XYZ, and two that they have the same core beliefs as you. And now, like, as somebody trained in like family and relationship therapy, I'm like, actually, what matters more is like, do you have normal stuff in common? Do you tend to eat the same kinds of food? Like, kind of helpful if you have the same like circadian rhythms and tend to be, up at the same time during the day. Do you have shared values about like your life and how you want to spend it? Like, do you want to have your own hobbies? Do you want to have shared hobbies? Like, actually what you believe does not matter in a long-term partnership unless you are in a belief system that requires that. So high control religion says, well, the only thing that matters about a marriage is if they share the same religion or belief. But I think there's all these other ideas of relationships that are like, yeah, I don't really care what you believe about the afterlife. That has no impact on my life. Do you also like going out for pizza? Like, because that's what we're going to spend most of our lives doing. It's like, oh, do you do the dishes around the same time that I like think the dishes should be done? Like, real practical compatibility in friendship or partnership or becomes so much more important. Like,
mm.
belief changes. Like, belief is kind of meaningless, but action really matters in relationships.
Yeah, well said, well said. I was curious, just sort of moving the story a little bit towards your current time frame. Could you tell us maybe what were some of the most important parts of your internal journey of healing from religious trauma? What were the things that you did that really moved it along in ways that you would, remember well, and say that it took you
Mhm.
from a place of, grief or emptiness to a place of wholeness and reclaiming your identity? And how did that sort of begin to evolve to you turning it from your personal journey to you becoming a therapist? Because obviously what you're doing from a thousand foot view is you took your healing process and you're just opening it up to try to
Mhm.
help other people as well. How did that all come about?
I think the thing that helped me the most was relationships with other people. So when I first started, asking questions about faith, it was about these very specific parts of Christianity, like complementarianism, the idea that like all men should be leaders and all women should be, submissive, compliant followers. So like people who are deconstructing even in Christianity, like bringing this feminist lens to it was really helpful to me and helped me build relationships. And from there, once you start down the slippery slope of questioning high control religion, then you start questioning this idea of sexuality. Then you start questioning purity culture. Then you start questioning, like, I don't know, hopefully like capitalism and white supremacy and some of these other things. So I think what helped me initially was like, I got out of conversations that were specifically about deconstructing religion. And I started just like reading Black history in the United States. I started listening to podcasts of people who weren't talking about religion or not religion. They were just talking about like art and how to build relationships and I don't know, pop culture and things that I wasn't exposed to as like a sheltered, Christian teen. So like I just like got into the world. I sort of didn't stay very long in conversations like conversations about Christianity tend to happen in Christianity, but turns out most of the world like isn't talking about that, right? They're talking about like, I don't know, reality TV or like global political situations, or they're talking about like how do they make some like cool art in their community or go on a walk and enjoy nature, or how do they, how do you feed your family? Like what have you cooked lately that like is functional? So I left some of those conversations behind for a while, and I think that really helped my healing. Um, because even having those conversations and having to think all the time about like, well, what do I believe, kept me in the mindset that I had in fundamentalism, which was like always focused on belief, finding the right beliefs, reading the next book, like making this feel good. So I just like walked out the door into the world and everything was new and exciting and interesting, and I didn't put up a lot of guardrails, right? Like I didn't read Christian books deconstructing purity culture. I read like secular books deconstructing monogamy and, you know, compulsory homosexuality or heterosexuality and like the things that are actually harmful, whether or not they have a religious lens on them or not. So that's what I would encourage people to do is like stop trying to figure it out with the tools that that system gave you and go like walk into the world and build some new things to care about. Um, Still subscribe to your channel, of course, but like keep exploring other things too, because you never know what else you might be interested in that you weren't exposed to if you grew up in a high control religion or a really sheltered environment. I love reading about everything and I'm interested in most things, whether or not I believe in them. And that freedom really helped my healing. And then the other thing that helps was actually going to trauma therapy. It's something that is often expensive. I know it is a time commitment. It is a like emotional and psychological commitment. So maybe once you found your footing in a couple other ways and like made one friend who maybe didn't grow up religious or at least didn't grow up in your religion, you'll have enough footing to be able to think like, okay, when do I need to go back and tackle some of these things that my body is carrying? Or when do I need to be honest about some of the impacts that growing up this way or even being involved in a group as an adult that was harmful to you? Like, how do you unpack those?
And what would you say was the first time you thought to yourself, "This has been such an incredible journey of healing that I'm going to do it as a full time therapist"? Like, what was that like?
Yeah, so I was writing, I was doing a lot on Twitter and writing for some blogs back in 2012, 13. And I saw a lot of people take their own experience and try to use it to help other people. And I saw that not go very well. So I was working in higher education at the time. And when I had the opportunity to go to grad school and become a therapist, I thought, oh, I'll just work, as a counselor in higher education in some form, work at a college counselor or career counselor or something like that. But as I was in my studies, I really had like set aside all of the work that I was doing around deconstruction and writing because grad school is actually like a huge investment and I was still working as well. I had moved and things like that. So that was when I moved to Southern California. And so I was like, you know what? I'm just going to put all this aside and focus on becoming a really good therapist because I don't just want to take my own experience. And at the time, I wasn't necessarily thinking that I would focus on religious trauma as a clinician. So I was like, great, I'm just going to put everything that I've been working on aside, let that go. I wasn't making any money at it anyway. That's fine. It was just sort of a, fun personal hobby. And so that's what I did for 3 years of graduate school. I was like, I just want to be a really good clinician. And then when I completed my graduate degree in California, you have to do another 3,000 hours of training and education. So that took me a couple more years to do. And it was really as I was thinking about, getting licensed and starting my own practice and where I wanted to focus, that more and more people kept talking about religious trauma as a field that was starting to get some like research grounding behind it. And that made me light up. And I realized, like, what else am I supposed to do in this world if not work that makes me light up and that makes me really excited? Like, the reason why I work primarily with people who've experienced religious trauma in some capacity is because those are often the coolest people in the world. To change your belief system is incredibly hard. To lose potentially everyone that you knew growing up, the value of your degree, your occupation, if you worked in ministry, your family, your marriage, whatever you had to lose, like that made you into the kind of person who was willing to be courageous and question things. And I love helping those people heal, become more connected to the way they want to live now. And that was just work that seemed really interesting and challenging and exciting for me. So I started talking about it a little bit more and started talking about it a little bit more on my Instagram. And it's been really fun to join the community again. Like I said, I was like out of it for a while, but I'm not coming back with just like my own story. I want to come back with tools that feel like expansive and useful and varied enough for the kinds of people that need different tools. Because I'm only me, like I'm only one person, and I've had privileges based on my identity. I've had challenges based on my identity, but I am not like the poster child for how to recover from religious trauma. But I can tell you about here's what the science says about what it looks like to, heal trauma. And then I can talk about like, yeah, this is what real life looks like after. This is how to deal with triggers as they continue to come up. This is how to keep changing your beliefs with an open hand as you grow as a person. Here's how to navigate relationships with people in your life who are still religious or maybe a fundamentalist. And like, there are some ways to try to be psychologically well while you're doing that. And here's a lot of ways to have fun and like have a good life. Like I was always told in this sheltered world that like everyone outside of our church is suffering and like doesn't know the real truth. And like actually life is pretty fun and hard and weird and exciting. And that's where I get to live all the time, not just personally, but also in my work. And that's something that I just love and keeps me really inspired. And I hope will continue to keep me inspired.
Mm, I love it. Well, it definitely shines through. Yeah, I can definitely tell it's a passion of yours, and it is amazing once you realize that like you can step out of the roles that you thought you were assigned by God and just listen to
Mhm.
yourself. Like what makes you really thrive, and such a cool journey. And I feel like it if anything, my issue is now that I've found so many things that I really feel passionate about. There's never enough time,
Yeah.
especially with kids around. But yeah, it's like you want to seize the day as much as you can. I remember.
Mhm.
Did you ever hear the I don't know if it's one person or if it's a group of people, but did you ever hear the Facebook page Humans of New York?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
That where the person or group just goes and take pictures of people and then let them
Right.
tell their story, and then they write it up in a couple paragraphs or pages. And I remember
Yeah.
before I ever started this channel, thinking that is such a cool thing to just go to just an average person. That's like they're not selling anything, and you're not selling something to them. You're just saying, "Can I take your picture and can I hear your story?" And just share it with the world.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
as soon as I saw that, I thought, "Why didn't I think of that?" That's the cool thing, and people feel
Yeah.
affirmed by that. And it feels like in some ways this channel does that, and I feel very much the same. Like I found one of many things that make me feel alive, and one of them is just to connect to people because I feel like with the loneliness that we talked about in the journey of deconstruction, deconversion, a lot of it really does come down to community and saying, is there
Yeah.
anyone else out there now? Like I've lost so much, but where are my people, my new people?
Mhm.
And they're usually more your chosen people than as opposed to your
Right.
family. But it's such a beautiful thing to hear people's stories, and also to just know that like if you're in a Christian bubble where your parents perhaps and your friends and everybody is just telling you you are so wrong. And I think if when I first got exposed to like the deconverting community, everybody there seemed very, very like different. And I'm not saying this in
Mhm.
advance, it's like everybody had like nose rings and tattoos.
Right.
And it's like I'm used to people that are very clean cut. And I
Yeah.
thought, that like it's hard to listen for me at that time. It was hard to listen to some of those people, even though I knew that they were bringing up good points. Like you just look so different. It feels so different. Those
Mhm.
were stumbling blocks. But then to realize later that I could actually use that sort of in my favor, that there are people, Christians, who will go through the same thing and say, I don't want to listen to the person with the tattoos all over their body. But if you can find me someone that looks just like me and talks like me and can quote verses, off the tip of your head, and they're just like you look like you could step back into preacher mode in the next 10 seconds.
Yeah.
Well, like that's where I am. I still I'm in preacher mode in some ways where I feel like I can relate to that so much. It was in my blood, and I realized that
Mhm.
that's what makes me thrive is to and shine is to be able to take that all those years of experience and say I'm not going to just call it a waste. Yes, in some ways it's a waste, but in other ways I can use it for something very beautiful, and that is to, in my words, to free people's minds.
Right. Yeah, to offer them freedom, to show them something, and to like prove that you really believed it. Right. Like I still have so many Bible verses that I like think in these scriptures that I was, forced to memorize as a young child, and also felt a lot of joy in memorizing, right? Because it made me feel good and like I was engaging in this group and I could win at quizzing and stuff like that. But like, okay, so I can't change what happened to me, but what do I want to do with it now? How can I use it to, bring forward my values of like love and kindness and acceptance, even when I wasn't given those things? Like, okay, so I'm really good at Bible trivia still. Like, that's fun. That's not
Oh,
something that everybody has. Like, okay, I grew up in a weird cult. Like, that makes me very fun at parties.
let me put you in spot. How old was Methuselah?
Oh gosh, like 689 or something.
It's been a minute. I forget too. I forget how old he was. Yeah,
Yeah,
I
I
used to
forgot
be
a few
really
details.
I used to be really good at the sword drills. Did you do
Yeah,
those where
how to
someone would
find
start
those.
quoting a verse and then you'd have to find it first?
Hmm.
Yeah. It's and I love too just with I feel like both what you do and what I do is sort of they're complementary in the sense that for a lot of people, what they're trying to do in some ways is reclaim their identity, but also to feel special. Like you felt special as a Christian, you felt
Yeah.
special as a child of the King, and all you're part of
Hmm.
something just momentous and universal. And all of a sudden, you're like, I'm not involved in anything really big. It's just my little teeny life. But to say like you still have a chance here to reclaim your identity, and I feel like, a lot of people, it needs to be behind closed doors in private conversation to really do that hard work. But then it's
Hmm.
also really cool to be able to say to somebody like, "Hey, you might not be ready to start a YouTube channel yet. Hopefully, maybe some people are going to be ready someday. But at the same time, there's just platforms like mine and others where you can come on and take your couple hours and say, I still want to share my story. And it's amazing to me. But
Yeah.
some of the stories, even stories where like I interview people and I'm like, that that was, like, not as like, there were some interviews that just popped, and others are like, "Eh, that was so-so," and I wish it had popped, but I couldn't make it pop. They could make it pop, and even some of those, I'm shocked at some of the comments where people say, "This particular person," like, not all the other people,
Hmm.
but this particular person, they spoke to me in ways that, like, no one else you've ever had on the channel. Like,
Mm,
that's
so
crazy, but this
beautiful.
this one person made a difference, and I love it, and as you
Yeah.
obviously spend more time doing this, you get more and more diversity of people's backgrounds, and I love it because I figure if eventually someone's listening long enough, they're gonna find someone and say, "Tim's story didn't resonate and that person didn't, but that person really did," and now that I feel that connection, it's a beautiful thing. On the note
Mhm.
of community, I did want to ask. I'm going to again recommend that people go check out your website, which is beneath this video, but also with your Instagram and any other platforms you want to talk about that you're brainstorming. Like, what can people expect when they connect with you through Instagram, and like, what is your heart for taking your passions and your abilities and your insights, and like, how do you want to approach not just your one-on-one clients, but just the community in general?
Mhm. Yeah, I think the thing that I want to make real is that like real life is possible after religious trauma or growing up in a high control group or being involved in a high control group. Like it's not the end of the story or it doesn't have to be. It's something that you do have to work through and systematically, like intellectually, that's a piece of it. Certainly, as a trauma therapist, like there's a piece in your body that needs some like work through and understanding. It's often a shift in your relationships that can be really hard. Like if you weren't taught relationship skills, like what actually matters to have functional relationships, not just how do you believe and perform to stay a part of the group, but like how do you actually understand people who are different than you and build that as a skill? Like that's kind of what I hope to offer in my little reels that I do is like the idea that life is worth living after religious trauma, that religious trauma is not the whole story. It's not the end of the story. It's something that impacted me. It's something that continues to impact me. But I get to have like a big, wonderful life outside of that, or life that's meaningful to me outside of that. Like you can live a small life and have that be meaningful. Like ultimately, in the, theme of like cosmic or evolutionary progress, like all our lives are insignificant, and that means we get to choose how to make them meaningful in a lot of different ways. And I want to talk about that freedom. I'll also certainly talk about some of the challenges of healing religious trauma. Like one of the big things I talk about is like, how do you talk to your mega parents, or like how do you deal with conservative parents and maintain the kind of relationship that you might want to wait, whatever might be possible. I want to help you find that. Whatever might be possible in those relationships, I want you to help you find that. So that's the kind of stuff I talk about on my Instagram. I'm also thinking of new ideas all the time. I'd love to do more work deconstructing the relational ideas that purity culture gave us. There's a lot of great sex education people out there, if you want to find them, who do sex education after purity culture. But I'm more interested in like, what are the relational impacts of purity culture, and how can you continue to unwind those? So if you're interested in those kind of conversations, come follow me over on Instagram.
That's awesome. I did a roundtable on purity culture with a few people a couple months ago. I've been trying to get some good questions together for a follow up. I'd love to have you on a panel if you're open to coming back for that. That'd be awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to talk.
Very cool. Well, just in terms of wrap up, I know I asked you a lot of questions, and I appreciate you entertaining my questions there just to clarify your timeline and your story. But before we do bring it to a close, was there anything else in your heart that you wanted to add to what we talked about so far?
I just want to encourage people to be curious. And if something, even if they're not sure of it fully, like the smallest thing you can do is take a break from religion or a belief system right now. You can always come back to it. But if you're looking for clarity or something's just not sitting with you, trust that your body wants you to just take a little break, take a little distance. You don't have to blow up your whole life because of a question you have. But I think you are more likely to find the right answer for you if you are in a safe and quieter place for you, maybe with some, less pressure if somebody's trying to keep you believing or make you believe something. So if that's you, like trust yourself to just take a little break and then go from there.
Hmm. Good words. Good words. But before we wrap, so I think my final wrap up, I actually have a little guest here.
Ah,
I just had somebody come in, so we're going to wrap it up together. Can you put this in your ear?
hey, buddy,
This is Ellie Jane.
Kelly,
This
and
is Emily.
Emily.
Say hi, Miss Emily. Well, I just wanted to say thank you so much for sharing your story today. And this is this is the little girl that also I'm trying to put a lot of beauty into her life. And it's amazing when you take some of these concepts and you think about how it changes your parenting. It really does make you into a better person. I think, arguably in a lot of ways, but especially in parenting and trying to just take away the bad stuff, take away the nightmares if you can, and give them a better shot at reality than we have. But, well, I'll
Yeah.
just wrap up by saying we've been speaking with Emily Maynard, and we have some links beneath this video again for you to check out. So please do subscribe. But Emily, thank you so much. It's great to get to know you and great to hear your story. I really appreciate it, and I definitely want to have you back sometime if you're up for it.
Thanks for having me. This was such an honor to talk with you. I love what you're doing here.
Thank you. Likewise, very much. Thank you again. Have a great day.